CEO told a single dad, "People like you don't belong here." Then the chairman shook his hand. Why did the CEO tell a single dad he did not belong here? What happened when the chairman chose to shake his hand? Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel. Please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our newest stories. Thank you for joining us and supporting the channel. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do if someone judged you before knowing your true value? Now let's begin this emotional journey and discover the first moments that changed everything. As we step into a story of respect, choices, and unexpected turns where hidden truths and powerful lessons await. People like you do not belong in this room. Those were the words that stopped the entire meeting before anyone understood why a quiet single dad had walked into the most powerful office in the company. Daniel Carter did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He simply placed the document on the table, looked at the CEO who had already judged him, and walked away. What no one in that room knew was that the man they dismissed had once been the reason the company survived its hardest year. Daniel Carter was not looking for recognition. He was only trying to protect the life he had built for his daughter. But one decision from the CEO would bring a forgotten truth back into the spotlight. Daniel arrived at Reynolds Global Technologies that morning wearing a simple work jacket, carrying a folder, and hoping to deliver information that could change the future of the company. He was not dressed like the executives walking through the glass entrance. He did not have a private assistant, an expensive watch, or a title printed on a business card. He was just a father who fixed problems quietly. Outside the building, his 9-year-old daughter Emma had reminded him to come home early. "Promise you will be there for dinner?" she asked. Daniel smiled and promised. That promise mattered more to him than any position inside a company. For years, Daniel had chosen a simple life. He repaired equipment, helped neighbors, and spent every possible moment with Emma. Most people saw a man who had stepped away from success. They never asked why. Inside Reynolds Global Technologies, Victoria Reynolds was preparing for another difficult day. As the company's CEO, she had built a reputation for making fast decisions and protecting the company's image. She believed every person in her organization had a place, and everyone had to prove they deserved to be there. When Daniel entered the executive conference room, several people looked confused. They expected a consultant or a senior engineer. Instead, they saw a man in a worn jacket holding a folder. Victoria glanced at him and then at the executives around the table. "Can I help you?" she asked. Daniel calmly placed the folder in front of her. "I believe these documents contain information you need to see." Victoria opened the folder but barely looked at the first page. Her attention was already on appearances. "This meeting is for senior leadership," she said. Daniel remained calm. "I understand. But this information concerns the entire company." The room became quiet. Victoria looked at him for a moment. "People like you do not belong here." The words landed harder than she expected because Daniel did not react the way she imagined. He simply nodded, picked up his things, and walked toward the door. But before he reached it, the conference room doors opened. An older man entered, and every executive immediately stood. It was Richard Reynolds, the chairman and founder of the company. He looked across the room, saw Daniel leaving, and asked one question that changed everything. "Why is the man who saved this company walking out of my meeting?" Richard Reynolds looked at Daniel Carter, standing near the conference room door, and for a moment, the entire room became silent. The executives who had ignored Daniel only seconds earlier were now watching the chairman with uncertainty. Richard did not look surprised to see him. He looked disappointed that Daniel had been treated like someone who did not matter. "Daniel, you were supposed to present the report yourself," Richard said. Victoria Reynolds turned toward him. "You know him?" she asked. Richard looked at his daughter and answered calmly. "I know exactly who he is." Daniel did not smile. He did not use the moment to prove anyone wrong. He simply stood there, the same quiet man who had entered the room carrying a folder and a responsibility. That was what caught Victoria's attention. Most people would have taken advantage of the situation. Daniel did not. He only wanted the information to be seen. Richard invited Daniel back to the table, but Daniel hesitated. He looked at Victoria for a moment, not with anger, but with disappointment. "I only wanted the company to see what was happening," Daniel said. "That was all." Richard nodded. "And that is exactly why I trusted you." The room changed instantly. The same person who had been dismissed minutes earlier was now being treated with respect by the highest authority in the company. Victoria watched carefully, trying to understand what she had missed. After the meeting ended, Daniel left without asking for praise or recognition. He returned to his small home outside the city, where Emma was waiting with dinner prepared on the kitchen table. "You are late," she said with a small smile. Daniel laughed softly. "I know. Important meetings take longer than expected." Emma looked at his face and noticed something. "Did something happen?" Daniel sat beside her. Sometimes people make decisions before they know the whole story. Emma thought about that. Did they learn the story? Daniel smiled. Maybe. The next morning, Victoria arrived at the office earlier than usual. She could not stop thinking about the previous day. She had spent years judging people quickly because she believed speed was a sign of strong leadership. But Daniel had challenged that belief without saying a single harsh word. She asked her assistant for Daniel's employment records and project history. What she found surprised her. Daniel Carter was not simply a maintenance worker. Years earlier, he had been involved in one of the company's most important technical projects. His name appeared on documents connected to a major breakthrough. But over time, his role had almost disappeared from public records. Victoria continued reading. The more she learned, the more uncomfortable she became. She had judged Daniel based on his clothes, his position, and the fact that he did not look like the people sitting in her conference room. She had never asked what he had contributed. Later that afternoon, Richard found Victoria reviewing the old files. "Now you understand why I stopped the meeting," he said. Victoria looked at him. "Why did he leave?" Richard paused. "Because Daniel never cared about recognition. He left because someone else needed him more." Victoria looked at the file again. For the first time, she wondered if the man she had pushed away was not someone who failed to belong in her world. Maybe he was someone her world had failed to recognize. Victoria Reynolds had spent years believing that successful leaders needed to make decisions quickly. She believed hesitation created weakness, and emotions often distracted people from results. But after learning about Daniel Carter, she began questioning the way she judged others. The file in front of her showed a different version of the man she had dismissed. Daniel was not someone who had failed to rise. He was someone who had chosen to step away. Years earlier, he had played a critical role in developing a technology project that helped Reynolds Global Technologies expand into new markets. His ideas had saved time, reduced costs, and helped the company overcome challenges that many believed were impossible. But when the project succeeded, Daniel never stood in the spotlight. He simply returned to his quiet life. Victoria looked through the documents again, searching for an explanation. "Why would someone with this experience leave everything behind?" she asked Richard. The chairman looked toward the city outside his office window. "Because Daniel understood something many successful people forget. A career is important, but it is not everything." Victoria thought about those words. She had spent so much time protecting the company's reputation that she had forgotten to understand the people who built it. Meanwhile, Daniel continued his normal routine. Every morning, he prepared Emma's breakfast, drove her to school, and worked at his small repair shop. He never mentioned the meeting to his daughter. He never complained about Victoria. When Emma asked if the company people were nice, Daniel simply said, "Some people need time to understand things." That answer stayed with Victoria when she unexpectedly visited Daniel's repair shop later that week. She wanted to speak with him directly, but she did not know how to begin. The place was simple. Tools lined the walls. Old vehicles waited for repairs. A small photo of Daniel and Emma sat near the counter. It was not the environment she expected from someone who had once influenced one of the company's biggest achievements. Daniel looked up when she entered. "Ms. Reynolds." Victoria noticed he did not sound angry or disrespectful. He sounded professional. That somehow made her feel worse. "I wanted to apologize," she said. Daniel listened quietly. "I judged you before I understood your situation." Daniel placed a tool on the table. "That happens often." Victoria looked surprised. "You are not upset?" Daniel thought for a moment. "I was disappointed. There is a difference." Those words affected her more than anger would have. Daniel was not trying to punish her. He was simply honest about what happened. Before leaving, Victoria noticed Emma's drawing on the wall. It showed Daniel standing beside a small house, a repair shop, and a smiling family. "Your daughter drew this?" Victoria asked. Daniel nodded. "She believes people are more than what others see." Victoria looked at the picture for a long moment. For the first time, she understood that the man she had underestimated was not trying to enter her world. He had already built one that mattered. But when Victoria returned to the company, she discovered something that changed the situation completely. An old project report connected to Daniel had been removed from the company archives. Someone had tried to erase the history she was only beginning to discover. The missing project report was not just a forgotten document. It was a piece of history someone wanted to disappear. Victoria Reynolds stood in her office, looking at the empty space where the original file should have been stored. For the first time in years, she felt something she rarely experienced as a CEO: uncertainty. She had built her career by trusting systems, reports, and numbers. But now, the system itself was showing signs that something had been hidden. Richard Reynolds joined her in the office and looked at the screen. "This is why Daniel mattered," he said. Victoria turned toward him. "You knew someone removed it?" Richard nodded. "I suspected it. But I needed someone willing to look for the truth without wanting credit." Victoria understood immediately. Daniel had never chased recognition. He had never tried to return to the company and demand what he deserved. He had simply continued living his life. The more she learned about him, the more she realized how different he was from the people she usually worked with. That afternoon, Victoria asked her internal team to restore the missing records. The search revealed something unexpected. Daniel's original contributions had been reduced over time, and another executive had received much of the recognition. The name connected to the changes was Thomas Blake, the company's chief operating officer. Thomas had worked closely with Victoria for years. He was respected by investors, trusted by executives, and known as someone who always had an answer. But now, Victoria began looking at his actions differently. She remembered how quickly he had dismissed concerns about old projects. She remembered how often he encouraged her to focus only on current results. She had trusted him because he appeared confident. Daniel had been different. He never needed to appear important. He simply was. Later that evening, Victoria returned to Daniel's repair shop. She found him helping Emma organize school supplies while preparing to close for the day. The simple scene made her pause. She had spent years surrounded by people who measured everything by success, but Daniel measured his life differently. "I found something about your old project," Victoria said. Daniel looked at her carefully. "What did you find?" "Someone changed the records." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "I thought that might happen." Victoria looked surprised. "You knew?" Daniel nodded. "I knew something was missing. I just did not know how far it went." Victoria realized Daniel had carried this knowledge quietly for years. He could have exposed the situation earlier. He could have demanded recognition. Instead, he chose peace and focused on Emma. "Why did you not fight for your name?" she asked. Daniel looked at his daughter before answering. "Because I did not want her to grow up seeing her father chase people who refused to respect him." Victoria felt the weight of that answer. It was not weakness. It was strength. The next morning, Thomas Blake entered Victoria's office after hearing about the investigation. He remained calm, but his expression changed when he saw the documents on her desk. "Victoria, I hope you are not letting old emotions influence business decisions," he said. She looked at him differently now. "I spent years believing confidence meant someone was right." Thomas said nothing. Victoria continued, "I was wrong." For the first time, Thomas realized the balance of power inside Reynolds Global Technologies was beginning to shift. And this time, Victoria was not protecting the company's image. She was protecting the truth. Thomas Blake had always been the person everyone trusted when problems appeared. He knew how to speak in meetings, how to calm investors, and how to make difficult decisions sound simple. For years, Victoria Reynolds believed those qualities made him the perfect leader. But now, as she looked through the missing project records, she began to see something different. Confidence was not always the same as honesty. The investigation continued inside Reynolds Global Technologies, and every new discovery created more questions. Several documents connected to Daniel Carter's original work had been changed. Important details had been removed, and some of his contributions were no longer connected to his name. Victoria felt uncomfortable because she recognized something painful. She had benefited from a system that allowed the truth to disappear. Meanwhile, Daniel continued working at his small repair shop, unaware that his past was becoming the center of attention again. When Victoria visited him, she found him repairing an old family vehicle while Emma organized books nearby. It was a simple moment, but it showed her something she had not understood before. Daniel did not need a powerful office to prove his value. His character was already visible in the way he lived. "I need to ask you something," Victoria said. Daniel looked up from the vehicle. "What is it? Why did you never tell anyone what happened? Daniel remained quiet for a moment. Because I thought the work mattered more than my name. Victoria looked surprised. But your name was removed from something you created. Daniel nodded. That is true, but I still had a choice. I could spend every day trying to prove I was right, or I could spend my time being the father Emma needed. The answer stayed with Victoria. She had spent years protecting her position because she feared losing control. Daniel had lost recognition and still found peace. That difference changed the way she saw him. Later that day, Richard called a private meeting with Victoria. Thomas knows you are investigating, he warned. Victoria looked at him. How do you know? Richard replied. Because people who are afraid of the truth usually notice when someone starts searching for it. The next morning, Thomas entered the executive office with a prepared explanation. He claimed the missing records were simple administrative mistakes. He suggested Daniel was misunderstanding old information and creating unnecessary problems. But Victoria was no longer listening the same way. She noticed how quickly Thomas avoided specific questions. She noticed how often he changed the subject. Most importantly, she noticed that he never asked about Daniel as a person. He only talked about protecting the company's reputation. That was the moment Victoria understood the difference between leadership and image. A leader protected people and truth. An image only protected itself. Before leaving the office, Thomas looked at Victoria and said, "You should be careful about who you choose to trust." Victoria watched him walk away and quietly answered, "I think I finally am." That evening, Richard visited Daniel's garage. He found him helping Emma with a school project. "You know this is going to change everything," Richard said. Daniel looked at him calmly. "Maybe." Richard smiled. "You still do not want recognition." Daniel looked at his daughter and smiled. "Recognition is nice, but being someone she can be proud of matters more." Richard understood then why Daniel had always been different. The company had searched for talent. Daniel had carried something much rarer, integrity. But as the investigation moved closer to the final answers, Thomas prepared his next move. And this time, he planned to make everyone question the one person who had always told the truth. Thomas Blake believed he had controlled the situation for years. He understood company politics, investor expectations, and the importance of appearing confident when people asked difficult questions. But he had underestimated one thing. He had underestimated how much Victoria Reynolds had changed. The woman who once accepted quick answers was now asking deeper questions. The CEO who once judged Daniel Carter by his appearance was now looking for the truth behind every decision. When the internal investigation continued, Thomas realized his influence inside Reynolds Global Technologies was no longer as secure as before. He scheduled a meeting with several executives and presented his explanation. He claimed the missing records were caused by outdated systems and simple misunderstandings. He carefully avoided mentioning Daniel's name, hoping the company would focus on the problem instead of the person who discovered it. But Victoria noticed. She noticed every time he avoided a direct answer. She noticed every time he redirected the conversation toward protecting the company image. "We are not discussing reputation right now," Victoria said. "We are discussing facts." The room became quiet. It was the first time many executives had seen Victoria challenge Thomas directly. After the meeting, Richard Reynolds congratulated her. "That was the decision I was hoping you would make." Victoria looked at him. "I should have made it sooner." Richard nodded. Most people do not change because they learn something new. They change when they finally accept that what they believed was wrong. Meanwhile, Daniel continued, living the same life he always had. He repaired vehicles, helped customers, and spent evenings with Emma. The attention from the company did not change him. When Emma asked why people from the big company kept visiting their garage, Daniel simply said, "Sometimes people need time to understand things." Emma smiled. "Like you said before?" Daniel nodded. "Exactly." One afternoon, Victoria arrived at the garage with a folder in her hands. This time, she did not arrive as someone giving orders. She arrived as someone asking for help. "We found more documents," she said. Daniel opened the folder and reviewed the information. The new evidence showed that Thomas had not only removed Daniel's contributions, he had also taken credit for decisions he did not make. Daniel remained quiet while reading. Victoria watched him carefully. She expected anger. She expected disappointment. Instead, she saw the same calm person who had walked into her office weeks earlier. "You are not surprised," she said. Daniel closed the folder. "I suspected it." Victoria looked confused. "Why did you never tell anyone?" Daniel answered honestly. Because I thought the truth would eventually find its way back. That answer stayed with her. Daniel had trusted the process even when the process had failed him. Later that evening, Victoria reviewed the final evidence with Richard. They discovered that Thomas had built his reputation by making himself appear responsible for successes that belonged to others. But the most important discovery was not about Thomas. It was about Daniel. The company had spent years searching for someone who represented its values. They had overlooked the person who had always lived by them. The next morning, Victoria called an emergency board meeting. She knew the decision ahead would change the company forever. But before she entered the room, she received unexpected news. Thomas had already prepared a presentation designed to make Daniel look unreliable. For the first time, Victoria understood exactly what was at stake. This was no longer only about correcting the past. It was about protecting the person who had always been honest when everyone else chose convenience. The boardroom had never felt so divided. On one side sat executives who had spent years believing Thomas Blake was the person holding Reynolds Global Technologies together. On the other side was a growing realization that the company had overlooked the very person who represented everything it claimed to value. Victoria Reynolds entered the room carrying the evidence, but she was not the same CEO who had dismissed Daniel Carter weeks earlier. She walked in knowing that leadership was not about protecting pride. It was about protecting what was right. Thomas stood near the presentation screen, ready with his own explanation. He had prepared carefully. His documents showed timelines, reports, and achievements that appeared to support his version of events. This company cannot make decisions based on the claims of one former employee, Thomas said confidently. The room became quiet. Victoria looked at him and calmly replied, "That is exactly why we are looking at the facts." She turned on the screen and presented the original project records, documents that had been removed, notes that had been changed, evidence showing Daniel Carter's real contributions. The executives watched as the story they believed for years began to change. Richard Reynolds sat at the end of the table, saying nothing. He knew this moment belonged to Victoria. She was the one who needed to make the decision. Daniel never asked for recognition, Victoria said. He never demanded a position. He never tried to damage this company after being overlooked. She paused. He simply continued doing the right thing. Thomas attempted to defend himself. He explained that business required difficult choices and that some names were removed because they were not considered important to the company's future. But those words revealed more than he intended. They showed exactly how he viewed people. As numbers. As positions. As tools. Victoria looked around the room. That is the problem. We forgot that behind every achievement, there are people. For the first time, many executives understood why Richard respected Daniel so much. Daniel's value was never only about his technical knowledge. It was about the way he treated others when no one was watching. After the meeting, Victoria asked Daniel to join her at the headquarters. When he arrived, the same hallway where he had once walked away feeling unwelcome now felt completely different. Employees greeted him with respect. People who had ignored him before now recognized him. Daniel did not seem impressed by the attention. He only asked one question. Did the company learn something? Victoria answered honestly. I think we are learning. She apologized again, but this time her apology was followed by action. She restored Daniel's official contributions, corrected the company records, and announced new policies to make sure employees were valued for their work, not their appearance or position. Daniel listened quietly. He appreciated the change, but he knew trust was built through consistency. Later that evening, Daniel returned home and found Emma waiting with a drawing. It showed her father standing in front of a large building with many people around him. What is this? Daniel asked. Emma smiled. It is where people finally see you. Daniel looked at the drawing and smiled. For years, he never wanted a spotlight. He only wanted the truth to be recognized. And now, the person who once walked away unnoticed had become the person everyone wanted to understand. Victoria Reynolds expected Daniel Carter to accept the company's recognition and move on, but she quickly realized that Daniel was not searching for a reward. He was searching for something much more meaningful. Respect. After the board meeting, many people inside Reynolds Global Technologies wanted to celebrate Daniel's return, but Daniel remained the same person he had always been. He arrived on time, worked quietly, and focused on helping others. That was what made Victoria understand him even more. She had spent years surrounded by people who wanted attention, promotions, and influence. Daniel had been given every reason to be bitter, yet he chose patience instead. One afternoon, Victoria visited Daniel's repair shop again. This time, she did not come with documents or business decisions. She came because she wanted to have a real conversation. "I owe you more than an apology," Victoria said. Daniel looked at her carefully. "What do you mean?" She took a moment before answering. "I judged you before I knew you. I saw your clothes, your job, and your situation before I saw your character." Daniel stayed quiet. He appreciated her honesty, but he knew words alone could not change what happened. "People make mistakes," he said. "What matters is what they do after they understand them." Victoria nodded. That was exactly what she was trying to learn. She did not want to fix the past with money or a title. She wanted to prove that she had changed through her actions. Over the following weeks, Victoria began making changes inside the company. She created new systems to recognize employees based on their contributions rather than their positions. She encouraged leaders to listen before making decisions. She wanted Reynolds Global Technologies to become a place where people did not have to prove their worth through appearances. Daniel noticed the difference, but he remained careful. He had spent too many years being overlooked to believe that one conversation could rebuild everything. Victoria understood that. She never pressured him to forget what happened. She simply showed up and continued doing what she promised. Slowly, something changed between them. Their conversations became easier. Victoria began asking about Emma, and Daniel began sharing more about his life. One evening, Victoria attended Emma's school event after being invited by Daniel. She watched from the audience as Emma proudly presented a project about family and important people in her life. Afterward, Emma handed Victoria a small drawing. It showed a house, a repair shop, and 3 people standing together. Victoria smiled. "Who are these people?" Emma answered simply, "People who help each other." The answer touched Victoria because she realized Emma saw something adults often forgot. Family was not only created by circumstances, it was created by care, trust, and presence. Later that night, Daniel and Victoria stood outside the school building. "You are different now," Daniel said. Victoria smiled softly. "I am trying to be." Daniel looked at her. "That matters." For the first time, Victoria felt that she was not trying to win approval or protect an image. She was simply becoming a better person. But as their connection grew stronger, Daniel still carried one question in his heart. Could he truly trust someone who once made him feel like he did not belong? And could Victoria prove that she was no longer the person who had walked away from the truth? Daniel Carter had spent years believing that some doors were meant to stay closed. Not because he lacked ability, but because he had learned that peace was sometimes more valuable than recognition. He had walked away from a company that once depended on his knowledge, built a quiet life with Emma, and accepted that some people would never understand his choices. But now, standing in the same world that once looked past him, Daniel saw something different. He saw people beginning to listen. Months after the board meeting, Reynolds Global Technologies continued to change. Employees who had once stayed silent began sharing ideas. Leaders started paying attention to the people behind the work. And Victoria Reynolds became known not only as a powerful CEO, but as someone willing to admit when she was wrong. She often thought about the day Daniel entered her office. She remembered the way she looked at him and made a decision before knowing his story. That memory stayed with her because it reminded her how easily people could be overlooked. One evening, Victoria visited Daniel's home for dinner. It was a simple evening, nothing like the formal events she was used to attending. Emma talked about school, Daniel prepared food, and for a few hours, there were no titles, no meetings, and no pressure. Victoria realized that this was the kind of life Daniel had protected all along. A life built around people, not appearances. After dinner, Daniel and Victoria stood outside while Emma finished her homework inside. "You know," Victoria said, "I used to think success meant reaching the highest position possible." Daniel smiled slightly. "And now?" She looked toward the house. "Now I think success means knowing what is worth protecting." Daniel understood how much that answer represented. Victoria was not trying to impress him anymore. She was not trying to erase the past with promises. She was simply showing that she had changed. Their relationship had grown slowly, built on honesty rather than expectations. Daniel still remembered the moment she told him he did not belong. But he also remembered every action she took afterward to prove she was different. She had earned the chance to be trusted again. Months later, Richard Reynolds attended a company celebration where Daniel was officially recognized for his contributions. When Richard handed him the award, Daniel looked uncomfortable with the attention. "You know I never wanted this," Daniel said quietly. Richard smiled. "That is exactly why you deserve it." Everyone in the room understood the meaning behind those words. Daniel was not respected because of a title. He was respected because of the person he had always been. After the event, Daniel returned home with Emma and Victoria beside him. They stood outside the repair shop where everything had started. The place was still small. The tools were still old. The work was still honest. But now, Daniel no longer felt invisible. He had never needed the world to see him as powerful. He only needed the people around him to see him clearly. Victoria looked at Daniel and smiled. "You were never someone who did not belong." Daniel looked at Emma, then back at Victoria. Sometimes people just need time to see the truth. And in that moment, the man who was once judged by appearances had found something greater than recognition. He found respect, trust, and a place where he truly belonged.